Happy October! It's Halloween month, which means that the bi-weekly video and podcast release schedule becomes a weekly Halloween-related release schedule. I'll just mention it here that our first Halloween podcast episode has me and my co-host Mike talking about The Invitation with our friend Multi-First. And you should go check it out after this video. Anyway, let's get on with this video. My name is Nate, and what the hell was that? This is an exciting one for me because I really enjoyed the movie, and years ago when I first started reading comics, I tried to get into this one and I just couldn't. But now I'm a little older, a little wiser, and I'm ready to give it another honest shot. And we're gonna do it together. There's clearly no shortage of vampires in media, but I think that the movie for 30 Days of Night is one of the better examples, so I'm pretty hopeful when it comes to the graphic novel. This video is going to be about the original 3-issue miniseries, and I read online that it's really kind of the only one worth reading. But if I like this, I'll probably read the other ones anyway, so if there's any interest, I'll make more videos about them. Without further ado, let's get into it. Issue 1. We're introduced to our setting of Barrow, Alaska, where, if you don't know, the climate is Arctic, and there's a point in the year where there's no sun visible for about 30 days. Our story begins on the last day of sunlight when an uncharacteristic crime wave is started, and the sheriff of the town, Eben, meets with his wife, who's an officer, Stella, because she has something that she's found and he needs to see it. Apparently, everyone in town has reported their cell phone missing, and they've just found a stockpile of destroyed and burned cell phones. They have no real idea who would have or could have done this, but decide to bring it to the town anyway. The two watch the sunset together for one last time for the next 30 days. We cut to a scene in New Orleans where we see a person who we shortly learn is a meth addict approaching a door and saying that he got what she told him to get, and then he's let inside. He's brought to a woman who he tells that he monitored the mail like she said, and then he hands her some papers, presumably in exchange for drugs. The papers contain a few back and forth letters from someone named Marlowe and V, discussing the plans that they've made to go to Barrow, and the woman is pretty angry about this. Back in Alaska, Eben and Stella watch the sunset as Eben gets called on the radio. Eben heads to a diner in town, where a patron requested raw hamburger meat and whiskey in a dry town. And when he was told that they don't have those things, or they don't serve those things, he started throwing out threats. Eben asks the man to leave or be escorted, and it seems like the man won't go willingly. Stella comes up behind him with a gun and they arrest him. We then meet a guy named Gus, who goes to a station of some kind, and we learn about how coming to Barrow changed his life for the better after he left his old life. And he finds the alarm system to the station to be destroyed. He finds a group of people and tells them that they can't be here. The leader of this group confirms with the man that all the TV and phone signals come through the station. He then orders the rest of the group to tear Gus apart and destroy the station, and we're introduced to our group of vampires. At the station, Eben and Stella notice the computers and phones go out, and we see the man from the diner, whose speech bubbles are stylized in the same manner as the vampires, so we can assume he's probably a vampire, tells them that there's nothing they can do. The man keeps egging them on, and Stella decides to go check on Gus at the station. But before she can leave, the vampire in the cell bends the bars with his bare hands and walks through, saying, "You are so fucked." Eben then blows the vampire's brains out. After shooting the guy in the head several more times for good measure, essentially decapitating him, foreshadowing, they head to the station, where they find it burned to the ground and they find Gus's head severed on a stake. As they drive back into town, Eben tries to rationalize that it must have been some kind of gang, escaped convicts, or terrorists. But Stella brings up the guy from the jail cell that bent the bars, and before they can continue, they notice a light in the distance. They get out and look through binoculars to see a group of people. Upon further inspection, Eben notices the people in the group have a pale complexion and rows of sharp teeth, and he urges Stella to get back in the car so they can warn the town as the issue ends. Issue 2. We pick up at an unspecified amount of time later, and the vampires have commandeered the town, blocking off all exits. They've feasted without prejudice and slaughtered all who've tried to fight back. We find ourselves with a desperate hidden group of survivors, Eben and Stella among them. Stella wonders what they did differently to the guy in the jail cell that he died when the others seemed to survive despite being shot, but decides it's not really worth it to experiment to find out. Back in New Orleans, the woman that we saw in the last issue is briefing her son, Jay, as he equips himself with all the typical vampire-killing paraphernalia, and a gun to use on himself in case it comes with it. And he also has a camera with a live feed. She tells him to get pictures and get out. No matter what, anybody that he finds can't be helped, and then he heads to Alaska. He gets to Alaska, and then he rents a helicopter. In Barrow, Eben sneaks out to find supplies and reflects how they've tried everything, including stakes and crosses, and they've had no luck in defending themselves. While foraging, he's caught in the act by a vampire. The vampire tries to bargain by sparing Eben in exchange for telling him where the other survivors are. Eben, however, pulls out a shotgun and shoots the vampire in the head. The vampire survives, and Eben smacks him with the shotgun and runs. On his way back to the hideout, he encounters a little vampire girl, and he quickly runs away and makes it to the hideout safely. We see Marlowe, who, if you remember, was the guy in the letter and the leader of this vampire group, trying to sniff them out. But we learn from the vampire that encountered Eben that the Arctic weather is kind of curbing their sense of smell. Marlowe mutters to himself that he'll catch Eben sooner or later, before the vampire Eben shot meets Marlowe, and someone shouts that he's here. Back in their hideout, Eben tells the group that their best bet is to wait until the sun comes up, if they don't starve first, since they can't be smelled. And then they hear clapping coming from outside. Outside, we see 3 vampires, and unfortunately I can tell you that these 2 lady vampires don't ever come up again. But the man is named Vicente. And look, I know I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, and I'm not pronouncing it like a real Italian, but this is what you're getting. Vicente is thanked for coming to see Marlowe's discovery here of how it's the perfect feeding ground. Marlowe sings the praises of his discovery and makes sure to note that they've been decapitating all the bodies so they don't turn. Marlowe is shocked to hear Vicente say how stupid he's been in this whole endeavor. Stella and Eben, now outside of the hideout, sit in shock watching. Vicente tells Marlowe how he's destroyed thousands of years of work that it's taken for vampires to become myths. He says the seeds of their extinction have been planted with the reveal of their existence. Tired of being talked down to, Marlowe tries to strike, but Vicente rips his head off. He then stomps on the head, and Eben sees this, thinking he's found a way to kill them as Stella tries to pull him away. Vicente tells the remaining vampires to plan going forward, which is to put the dead in their homes, kill any remaining survivors, but don't turn them, and then they'll destroy the pipeline, flooding the town with oil, and they'll light up the whole town, destroying it and destroying the evidence as the issue ends. Issue 3. The town of Barrow is beginning to go up in flames, and yet despite this, there's a glimmer of hope. Also, let's take a second to look at the first pages of the first issue and the third issue side by side and give the artist a big thumbs up because that's pretty neat. We see one of the survivors in the hideout turning because he was looking for a loved one and got scratched by a vampire before he managed to get away and back to the hideout. He turns completely and they all try to rush him. The newly turned vampire slashes someone in the face and tries to make a run for it. Eben smacks it in the head with a pole, and the group hold it down, while Eben uses a syringe that he found while scavenging in the last issue to take some of its blood. Stella then uses something to swing at its neck, decapitating it. Stella then asks Eben what the blood is for, and he says that he's not really sure yet. The vampires finish burning the dead and wonder where the remaining living are, as they notice a helicopter approaching. From the helicopter, Jay captures footage of everything. Vicente sees this and jumps up to the helicopter. The survivors hear the helicopter and debate about what to do, but decide to wait it out since the helicopter will likely be bringing help. However, Stella and Eben go outside and see Vicente attacking the pilot. The helicopter crashes and explodes and presumably ends the live feed. Vicente notes to the others that now they have a cause for the explosion in their cover-up. Stella tells Eben that they need to get the others in Brunn, but he says that they'll never make it, but he knows how he can beat them. Stella then realizes what he's going to do and pleads for him not to, but he injects the blood into himself. Eben then turns and tells Stella to stay away before running out the door. Vicente is about to eat 2 kids when he hears Eben call out to him. Eben approaches as the other vampires laugh. Eben lunges towards Vicente, who catches him and throws him into something. They trade blows while Eben says they're pathetic now that he truly knows what their existence is like. They battle on and Eben begins to start leading the fight and the onlooking vampires stop laughing. Those who are hiding come out and see Eben killing vampires left and right, until finally Vicente lunges towards them. Eben thrusts his arm into Vicente's open mouth and through his head, destroying it. The remaining vampires sit watching as Eben tells them to get out of his town, and they do it. Eben and Stella sit together and enjoy what little time is left before the sun rises. They kiss as the sun rises. Stella is left sitting alone with a pile of ashes as the story ends. Okay, I enjoyed it, but I definitely understand why it was hard to get into as a beginner comic book reader. And the main reason is probably the art style. And that is not to say that it's bad. It's far from it, really. The art style is extremely unique, and it gives the miniseries its own identity, and the roughness of the line work really fits thematically with the story, I think. But I think it can sometimes be a little hard to make out what's going on, especially if you're used to really clean-looking art from what you tend to see from larger publishers. You might notice in my recap, sometimes I would say, they hit something, or they hit someone with something. And that's because, honestly, I couldn't really tell what it was because of the art style sometimes. In fact, sometimes I could only make out what was going on because of the context from the dialogue. When I was younger, I think that might have been something that made it a little hard to get through. If you can get down with this type of art style, it's definitely worth it though, because there's some really great pieces of art in the series. And I really enjoyed the story, although I don't think it's flawless. Of course, not every piece of lore needs to be fleshed out completely, especially when you only have 22 pages to do it. But I would have liked a little more info about the characters from New Orleans. But I also haven't read the other books, so maybe there's more background given in the later additions to the series. I would have also liked to see Jay have more of a role other than to just go to Alaska and almost die immediately. But that feels a little bit nitpicky to me, since the helicopter crash was a nice way for the vampires to give more plausibility to their cover-up. I don't really understand why it was mentioned that Jay was sending a live feed back to his mother. Maybe, again, this is expanded on upon later additions to the series, but as it stands in this one, we don't really know if the rest of the world now knows that vampires are out there, and if it is, that definitely kind of nicks the whole plausibility to their cover-up thing that I mentioned. I don't know, if the intention is that the world now knows there's vampires, then that totally makes sense, because of course his mother now has the live feed that she can send out to the world. But if vampires are still a secret thing, then I don't know why they didn't just mention that he was going to get pictures and footage and then bring it back. I don't understand why they mentioned it was a live feed. Whatever. And I guess the idea with the first vampire death was that they shot him in the head so many times that his head was obliterated and was essentially decapitated, but I would have liked a better initial example for how to actually kill these things. My last complaint is that I personally don't really like it when stories like this resolve with the protagonist becoming one of whatever they're fighting. I prefer to have the characters think outside of the box and find an interesting and creative way to overcome the enemy rather than just fighting fire with fire. Even still, I think this story does it better than other instances that I've seen. And while it's not my favorite thing to see in a story, it serves this one well enough. A great thing about this too is that it's only 3 issues long, so you can definitely blast through it, and it's pretty quick. You can probably get through it in one sitting, so you really have nothing to lose by checking it out. And again, even though the artwork can be a little bit hard to make out sometimes, with the context of the dialogue and other things in the story, you should be fine. The movie that is based on this graphic novel is one of my favorite depictions of vampires in modern media. And though it's been a while since I've seen it last, I think it's able to do that by staying pretty faithful to the source material.
Hi, this is Nate from the future after this video was almost completed. While I haven't had a chance to watch the movie again, I did watch a really cool video from Roanoke Gaming, which I'll put the link for in the description, and the video was about the vampire infection from the movie. In that video, there was a recap about the movie. And after hearing the recap, it made me want to make a correction about some of the things I said about the faithfulness of the adaptation of the comic for the movie. The sentiment remains the same as far as the consistency about how the vampires are depicted in both versions, which is very good. So I want to say that I don't want to go into too much detail in case I decide to make a more extensive video on the topic later, but I do want to say that while the movie is a good adaptation, it is not one for one with the graphic novel. Some of the things that I'll briefly mention are, I'm glad that they cut the little subplot with the cast of characters from New Orleans, because like I said, I think it doesn't really do anything to help the story and it kind of muddies the water a bit. And I'm glad that in the movie, they seem to establish a little bit more concretely for the viewer how vampires are killed. In the comic, because of how Marlowe was killed, where he had his head ripped off, but he still seemed to be talking before Vicente crushed his head, that led me to believe that perhaps vampires needed to have their heads destroyed in order to die. I think I was wrong about that, but the movie seems to make it a little bit more clear that either beheading or like a shot to the brain will do it. I am bummed that the movie cut out Vicente. I really like that in the comic he has to go and clean up Marlowe's mess that he made because of his arrogance. In the movie, I don't think we really get any kind of indication that the vampires are too bold. When they come into Barrow, in my mind, they're taking a huge risk, and they're hoping that they get a huge payoff. And in the comic, I think Vicente really reinforces that idea, whereas as far as I can tell with the movie, that sentiment isn't really there. I could say more, and maybe I will in the future, but I just wanted to correct myself and just make it clear that, again, I think that the movie is a good adaptation, but it's not one for one in its faithfulness to the source material.
So in conclusion, we have a nice spooky start to Halloween. And I think that the movie is worth a watch, and while it can be tough to break through the aesthetic for some, the graphic novel definitely deserves a read by comic book fans. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out the spooky episodes of the movie podcast that I do with my friend Mike. This week's episode is another vampire-related movie in that of The Invitation, and we were joined by our buddy MultiFirst. So don't forget to go check it out in the link below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video because it helps the channel grow, and comment what you want to hear about next. Bye!